back. Today's book is The Family Plot by Megan Collins, and I am so excited about this book. I've kind of been on a reading roll lately, and this book was not on my radar whatsoever. My audiobook finished, and I was like, what audiobook can I start next? And I didn't want to do another book by an author I've done quite a few times. I didn't want to reread something, so I said, okay, I'll listen to this one. I cannot tell you how I discovered this book. I want to say it was through the library. It could have been me going through iBooks and I stumbled across it and I said, sure, I'll buy that. It was definitely a whim buy. We all know me, like I'm very stingy with my money, and I try to be very careful with what audiobooks I buy because that crap is expensive. I was very, very impressed. The main plot is this girl, her name is Dahlia. She comes from a family of murder aficionados. They grew up basically in isolation on this island called Blackburn Island. Her mother had been an heiress to a gun manufacturing company. Her parents had died. They'd been murdered by a disgruntled employee with one of their own guns. From this, she became obsessed with murder. And so she raised them, teaching them about murder, all these famous murder cases. We know that I'm strange. I find that extremely fascinating, all those kinds of things. Dahlia and all of her siblings are named after famous cases. She's named after Black Dahlia. Her sister is named after Sharon Tate. Her twin brother Andrew is named after Lizzie Borden's brother. Their other brother Charlie is, can you guess who he's named after? Charles Manson. I thought it was incredibly interesting the way that things were inserted into this novel. Those weren't exactly explored so much, but there was another side of all this murder in which there was the Blackburn killer. On this island, there was a serial killer. He was killing women at various points in time, and I'm going to go ahead and spoil it right now because this is probably my biggest issue with the book. The murderer was her dad. My issue is that we are given no reason as to why he chose to do what he did. There's a large age gap between Andy and Dahlia and Charlie and Tate. So Charlie was 6 when the Blackburn killer started killing. And there is a question posed at some point in the novel as to why would he do it? And I think it was Charlie goes, why do we need to have a reason? Like, he just did. And for me, that wasn't enough. As smart of a novel as this was, I needed more motivation behind their dad's actions. And in that same turn, this is something I'd seen in someone else's review, all of the characters seem to lack just a little bit of development. We never quite got to the root of why they were the way they were, who they were. By the end, I was a bit more placated, but for the majority of the novel, they almost felt like caricatures, but I got so far ahead of myself. So let me rewind. Dahlia and Andy are twins. She is now 26. He had disappeared on their 16th birthday and had left a note saying, I'm out of here, don't come looking for me. And she spends the next 10 years looking for him, which I thought was exceptionally strange. And that goes back to another point that it's a sentiment I share with a number of other reviewers, where the relationships between these two sets of siblings felt extremely incestuous. Somebody else pointed out, well, I would probably be this close with my siblings too if those were the only people that I knew. So I tried to go through the novel with that in mind, but I did wish, because they weren't incestuous. By all intents and purposes, they weren't, except for the fact that Charlie and Tate live together, and Dahlia is obsessed with her brother. It kind of bothered me. I wanted to be able to separate myself from that because it gave me too much of the Roanoke Girl vibes, and we all know how much I hated that book. Dahlia has not been home since she was 18 because she got her inheritance and boogied, but she is back because her father has died. They are going to honor him, and then the groundskeeper comes and says, I found a body in your dad's grave, and the body turns out to be Andy. I liked this aspect. There are two policemen involved in this story. One is a guy named Elijah. The other is his dad. His dad is someone who definitely was prejudiced towards the family, definitely suspected them of wrongdoing, and was always figuring out ways to harass them, come up with ways to get on their property and accuse them of things and make everything really uncomfortable. And so then we get Elijah, who Dahlia is extremely wary and suspicious of because all she knows is his dad. He shares a lot of the same mannerisms and habits as his dad. And what I liked was that Elijah was nothing like his dad. He was actually really good at his job, and he wasn't there to accuse them of anything. He was just trying to get information. So I enjoyed Elijah. Yeah, Elijah shows up and she's like, oh, do you really not know who I am? Super cynical. And he's like, I'm just trying to get information. It was interesting because we really weren't certain if it was Andy, because Dahlia was convinced that he was still alive. And this was something that I did have issue with. We kept being told about that twin thing, that sixth sense, that whole if he was dead, I would know it, because one instance she was scared and he came in and he was like, are you okay? One instance. I wish that had been developed a little better. Maybe it just would have been a bigger part, like more evidence to it, because then we could have gotten some of that psychological, supernatural element to make things a little bit spookier. In any case, it is him, and Dahlia goes about to figure out what happened to him. Charlie, meanwhile, decides to set up the mansion as, I keep calling it because their name is the Lighthouse. So I keep, in my head, I called it the Lighthouse Murder Mansion, but what he called it was the Lighthouse Memorial Museum. I like my name better. What he did was set up everything from their lives. All of the murder cases that they'd studied as children, all of the reports they had written, all of the things that Tate had drawn, all of her dioramas, like all this stuff surrounding murder, like everybody thought they were so weird. So I think the Lighthouse Murder Mansion was a much better name for it, but I'm not the author. Meanwhile, Tate has gained social media fame for her dioramas. What she would do are dioramas of murder scenes and named it Diorama, D-I-E, get it? Haha. And she decides to do one of Andy. And both of these actions incense Dahlia, and they incense me too, which is when I felt like the characters were caricatures. We are given no explanation as to why they feel this is appropriate. We are basically led to believe that they are callous and unfeeling, and they don't care about their family. They don't care about Andy. It's very self-serving, and they will not listen to Dahlia as she is trying to tell them, guys, don't do this. Why are you doing this? It's so inappropriate. Especially because, in a sense, she felt like Andy was her brother versus their brother, because there was such a large age gap that by the time Andy and Dahlia were of any age, the other two had already left and they hadn't come back. This is really offensive and affronting to her, which I completely agree with. Here's another spoiler. Eventually, Tate reveals that because of their very isolated upbringing, she doesn't know how to make friends. That's why she makes these dioramas, because it's her one way to connect with people. It's how people respect her and revere her. Charlie, I do take issue with this explanation because I felt like we could have dug a little bit deeper into it. But what he reveals, so one aspect of Andy is that he had obvious anger issues. He would go out into the woods and just hack away at trees. But first I was like, great, now we just have another weird character with a weird characteristic that's gonna have nothing to do with anything except he just likes to cut trees. But what we learn is, as I've already told you, their dad was the Blackburn killer. And what he did is he started with Charlie, and he would use Charlie as bait to entice these women to help a needy child, and then he would abduct them and murder them and do what he was going to do with them. And once Charlie got too old, he enlisted Andy, and Andy in many ways was much stronger than Charlie. He realized that what was going on was wrong and that he needed to get away. Charlie had been phased out when he was 14. So at Andy's 60th birthday, he comes home fully expecting, and this again kind of lent towards incest. He comes home fully expecting Andy to have been ousted as well, and then therefore no more murders to be happening, only to realize that, yeah, actually another girl had been killed 2 months prior. He has an encounter with Andy in the woods. Andy essentially is like, just kill me. I can't get out of here. I don't want to be a part of this. Here is my axe, kill me. And Charlie does. Granted, he says it's kind of like in a fit of anger, frustration, and not really being in his right mind. But it felt like a little bit of a throwaway answer for me. I would have preferred it to be more sinister, in which they had a fight. I would have thought it would have been much better if Charlie, for whatever messed up reason, wanted to keep all of this quiet, killed Andy. Or he was so angry that Andy had not been rejected by their father yet that he killed him out of jealousy. It's very interesting. I thought this was extremely disappointing at the end, though. It felt like Collins ran out of steam, where all of this has come to light. The fact that Dahlia Lighthouse, the dad, was the Blackburn killer was figured out. Like, the cops knew it. Nobody quite figured out who killed Andy, but obviously the family knows all the secrets. The one person they're not sure about is Dahlia. She wants her brother to be properly respected and his death to be resolved. She kind of would like Elijah to know, but the family is putting pressure on her to band with them. She eventually is like, okay, I will, under one condition, and that is that Charlie gets help. Okay, my problem is not that she required Charlie to seek mental health help, but I thought it was too simple for the novel, because she'd had a conversation with Tate, because throughout this novel, Dahlia is realizing those two have secrets. In a conversation with Tate, it is revealed that Charlie will never see someone about his mental health. When Dahlia brings this up, he automatically looks at Tate very accusatorially, and I was just like, on one hand, I liked it, because I like that he's putting up a fight, that perhaps he doesn't think he needs it, or his secret is so bad that he can't even tell it to a therapist. But on the other hand, I was like, that's it? That's our resolution? So all of the dirty laundry is aired. The family decides, after never being close-knit, to leave together, and all at the behest of Charlie seeking help. It just wasn't satisfactory. Another spoiler, though, is that the mother's parents, they weren't murdered. And this, I'm on the fence about, because I loved the idea. I know it's screwed up, but I loved the idea that they had been murdered, and it set the mother off on this path of murder obsession. I love that the only way that she can deal with what happened is to focus on other such cases and then pass that off to her children and obviously create a very unhealthy environment. But I thought it was very unique. Only to learn that they died from cancer because they'd been lifelong smokers. How anticlimactic. And maybe that's also why I had an issue with the resolution, was it was extremely anticlimactic. I don't necessarily have an issue with the fact that the family is going to keep the secret. I kind of like it, because not everything has to have a happily ever after. But there's just so little resistance. I mean, I would have come up with a million more ways to get my family to see things my way. I'd be like, okay, well, if you want this from me, this is what I want from you. You know, I would have milked it for everything it was worth. So when we get that revelation as to how the mother's parents actually died, I was blown away, because I was like, are you serious? This whole time you lied to me? I can't believe you lied to me and got away with it. But at the same time, I was like, that was the lie? It was so underwhelming. There were a couple of other little things. I enjoyed the red herrings. There is this one girl, the only neighbor that they had, that Dahlia and Andy used to make fun of because she would spy on them. She and Andy had actually been in a relationship. Like, at some point, they became involved. She was sort of instrumental in solving things without even knowing it. I thought it was interesting the way that she kept popping in and out, and how we suspected her, and then we suspected her grandfather because her grandfather said some very derogatory things about Andy. Then we suspected the groundskeeper, and there were so many suspects that we were like, I mean, maybe it was Elijah's father, and they were all plausible suspects. I quite enjoyed that. Their reasonings, their alibis, their timelines worked out so that they could have been Andy's killer. But what I really enjoyed was very, very early on, Dahlia realized that whoever killed Andy, they knew the family. Early on, Collins is planting that seed that this is close to home. The writing is probably why I enjoyed the book so much, because it was so intelligent, yet it wasn't literary. She wasn't trying to be so smart and above it all and metaphorical. It was more just a really well plotted mystery, and I enjoy a good mystery. There was the aspect of the mom baking cookies. So I don't remember if this was part of the book synopsis or somebody else's synopsis, but when I first read it, I was like, seriously? Because essentially what it said is they discover her missing brother's body. The brother goes off to do this, the sister goes off to do this, and then the mother bakes cookies. She bakes cookies? She bakes cookies when she's never baked cookies before, so she goes from this very atypical person to the mother who just bakes cookies all the time in the face of this adverse situation. It wasn't as cliched or cheesy as that. The rationale behind it is they discover her son's body right after her husband has died, which I really just need to get more into this mother figure. It's more like, I didn't take care of you back then, so let me try to do something to take care of you now. But the woman can't cook. And please tell me, is anybody that inept, honestly, that inept at cooking? Can you not follow directions in a recipe book? I understand maybe overcooking something, or maybe not knowing how to beat your eggs in sugar till they're light and fluffy. But this woman is so horrendously bad, it's like she just threw everything into a bowl and didn't even read directions. So that was not my favorite aspect. I thought that was a little too much of a caricature. But the mother had so much potential. And Collins, in many ways, was probably so focused on her plotting and her mystery that just in general, she left her characterizations to the wayside. I wasn't a huge Dahlia fan. I thought she felt really immature, particularly for a 26-year-old. And I kind of thought at certain times, like when we actually focused on Dahlia versus the greater issue at hand, I thought she was kind of boring, just dull. But the mother had so much potential. For one, how can you be married to a serial killer and not know it? How can you go so far off the deep end after your parents die that you are that obsessed with murder? How can you isolate your children to this extent? How can you be so obsessed with your husband or enamored, enthralled by your husband that you don't notice things about him? He could have been a sociopath for all I know. He could have been Jeffrey Dahmer and had her completely fooled. But it felt almost like she fooled herself. And some of the explanation we're given is he swept her off her feet. After this thing happened with her parents and all she wanted to do was get away, he was handsome and he said the right things and he became the family she didn't have. I did find that sort of hard to buy. She just wasn't enough for me. She could have been an integral player who added a lot more to the story, a lot more depth, and all she did was bake really bad cookies. She couldn't understand why nobody wanted to eat them even when they were inedible. There's a really good point Elijah made. He kept asking Dahlia things and she'd be like, I don't know. And he's like, you sure don't know a lot. And the same concept applies to the mother. She sure was unaware of a whole lot. To really tie things up, the Lighthouse Memorial Museum, it did end up happening. People showed up. A lot of people said things that weren't super nice. And then Charlie, out of guilt, displays the missing note that Andy had left. At this point, when Dahlia sees it, she recognizes a trademark flourish of Charlie's. She knows exactly who wrote the note, and she knows exactly who killed her brother. His memorial goes off, and then Tate does finish her diorama of Andy. Even though she's like, I don't think I'm going to post this one to social media, Dahlia realizes Tate's fans showed up. And all these people were taking pictures, and Dahlia was like, so Tate might not actually post it, but it doesn't mean he's still not going to be exploited. And Tate probably realizes that. And they all kind of ride off into the sunset. Dahlia realizes that she doesn't know how to make friends either, and the only friend she does have, she's not very nice to. I thought it was kind of sad that Ruby, who is Andy's girlfriend, got left behind. That was something that Andy kept saying was, you and I are going to leave. We're going to bring Dahlia, and we're just going to get out of here. And that's all she wanted was to get out, only for her to still be left behind in the very end. I feel so bad for the poor girl. So that's all I have for you today. I 2 thumbs up recommend the family plot. I especially liked the double meaning of the family plot because obviously that's how the whole book started, with the family had a plot where everybody was going to be buried, and that is where everything starts because we find Andy's body, and then basically the family plots to keep everything secret. Have a great day. Bye.